Hi, today I am joined by a good friend of mine, Kathleen Shannon, who's a licensed psychotherapist who's located in Black Mountain, North Carolina, which is right outside Asheville. And she is a therapist, had over 20 years experience working with a wide population of people. She does trainings and workshops on different things around the country. I wanted to specifically talk to her today about transforming spiritual trauma. Her two websites I want to go ahead and give you, and I'll put those in the info so you can click on them, is kbshannon.com and spiritualtraumarecovery.com. So, Kathleen, hi.
Hey,
Good to see you. By the way, there's a great German restaurant in Black Mountain.
Berlinder Kindle. Yes.
Yes, yes, yes. I've spent a little bit of time there and gained about 20 pounds. So
Easy to
it's
do.
good. Well, let's start by just telling everybody what spiritual trauma is, because I don't think this is something that a lot of people have paid enough attention to, because it is a very real thing. So just give us kind of your definition of spiritual trauma.
Well, my working definition of spiritual trauma, and it alters the more information that I get. It's it kind of borders between both spiritual and religious, and it's more based on a trauma that is a result of a belief system that you don't match our beliefs, so therefore you are evil and you are worthy of our wrath. And it can be anything from being part of the LGBTQ community. That happens frequently. It can be just not towing the line, not being the submissive wife. It can be a variety of things. On the other side of the spectrum, it can be because you want to be a homemaker and you want to be a submissive wife and you want to do all those things. Other groups seeing that as being inferior to what you really are. And I've had a problem with that for some time. And I really just, I didn't quite know what to call it. And eventually I just kind of had to gather a clutch of information. It's whenever somebody says, my ideology is better than your ideology, and because of such, I get to treat you awfully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I think, when we're talking about this, will have an automatic reaction, as in, "Oh, well, you're probably talking about this group, but or that group." But this happens in all kinds of spiritual slash religious groups, not just the stereotypical, you know, fundamentalist Christian organizations, but everything from new age groups, to more mainstream religious organizations. This kind of thing can show up. So when this does happen, I mean, can you give us kind of a scenario of how somebody could be traumatized? Maybe a familiar story that you can relate, and so we can kind of have an example of how this would work.
A good chunk of the people that I work with are either gay, lesbian, or bisexual. I've yet to work with the transsexual community yet, or transgender community, I'm sorry. Um, that because they are this way, the church that they grew up with, and again, this isn't just church, this is a variety of different places. Um, they say, no, that's a sin, that is evil, and you're going to bring upon the wrath of God, and I get to deliver it. And it's really, it's broken up families. Somebody will come in and say, I can't come out to my family because I'll be disowned. And or they come out to their family and indeed they are disowned, or God help them. And I've seen this happen so many times, both ways. And it's been a beautiful thing in some ways and not so much in others. When the church leader's son or daughter comes out. So what does the church leader do?
Hmm.
And that puts the entire family, now the entire family is under the microscope, and it gets kind of sad and scary, and everyone's involved. A lot of people saying, well, the pastor just needs to stand up and, defend his family, and this is what needs to happen. And now he doesn't have a job.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it gets to be a very sticky wicket in that regard. I've had people come in from various sects. I'm reluctant to use the term cult because that always is an offensive term, especially if one is in a cult. One would never think that one is in a cult. Why would one think such a thing?
Mhm.
Um, Various sects of the faith where we have as our duty, and it comes from a good place, that we have to go out and we have to evangelize and knock on doors and do all the things. And the beautiful thing is when I see people actually not outright say this group of people is bad and wrong because of that, and they've left the faith or they were excommunicated from the faith, that they said, you know what, these people really, honest to God, were well-meaning people.
Mhm.
They just didn't go about it in the right way. And that's when I see the healing process begin, is when people actually start to see the well-meaningness behind the behavior that may be very problematic.
So balancing their perception, because if we're the person who's the focal point of the negativity, seeing that there's some balance of, yes, there's this negativity, but in some cases, not all, but in some cases, there's an intention, and you may have to dig for it, but there's an intention to help, to do what they perceive as the right thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so allowing the clients you're working with to kind of have a balanced perception of the situation, as opposed to just being stuck in, this is horrible, this is terrible, and kind of understanding maybe the motivations a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It, in a way, it's breaking the whole notion of I guess the only way I could call it is a fundamentalism.
Right, right.
Whereas they came from a fundamentalist structure, so it's a very familiar structure to them. Taking any ideology and putting it in that structure would be very familiar to them. So
Mm,
therefore becoming a what I would refer to as a reactionary atheist or
yeah.
a whatever. They still keep the structure
Right,
that this
right.
is the way it is and it's my way and da 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 da, and they're not even seeing that they're doing the same exact thing that they were. They've just switched up ideologies on the whole
It's
thing.
like the pendulum goes the other way, but the same system stays intact in a way.
Solidly intact. Solidly intact.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um, I'm thinking this. I remember reading about this group, and I'm not going to mention the names, but this was a very respected group years ago. It had a gentleman who had been a Buddhist monk and a yoga master who was involved in all of this, and he wrote some really good books that I had read on some of the topics. But then in time, it became very cliquish, and it ended up where they were having a falling out, and you know, he and his partner and partner got involved with someone else, and then it's became this big mess that where people within the community were having to choose sides, and then they were being ostracized, and then stated they were not spiritual enough. Which, I mean, I'm just for the viewer, I've always had a problem with that word because I wanted to know who specifically dictates what's spiritual. And so that's part of the problem, I think, is because you get it, oh, you're not spiritual enough here. You're not, you're not doing this. So even in these so-called enlightened, I don't want to call it new age, but more Eastern oriented, peaceful, allegedly, communities, this stuff can still happen. So when somebody comes from that or from the local, we have a lot of Baptist church here, Methodist churches, and they come in and go, I feel like I've lost my family.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
dealing with abandonment, aren't you?
Exactly. Abandonment. When you've grown up in this structure, you go to church twice on Sunday and once on Wednesday, and Thursday is Awana, and choir practice is Monday night, and Bible studies Tuesday. I mean, if your entire life is structured around this entire thing, and now you are not that anymore, your whole identity is just shot.
Now,
And
that's
if you're
pretty
either
severe.
abandoned, yeah, that is severe.
Yeah.
And abandonment can kind of happen in one of two ways. Either you are shoved out, which that is like classic abandonment with a capital C.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the more, I don't even believe this anymore. Why am I even here? And so you sort of abandon them, and then you have that sort of weird guilt of, I've left these perfectly good people behind, and what do I do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, for something to be spiritual trauma, now for some people they have a very I'll say a limited view of what's traumatic. And if we actually go and look into the DSM, it doesn't dictate a specific thing. You are only traumatized if you go through combat or sexual assault. It's any event that the brain registers as traumatic. So this whole losing one's identity, feeling as if you've been totally abandoned, and then if you've had a change in faith, now you may not have something to replace it with. So it is this. It could be an incredibly traumatic event that a lot of people, maybe in the general public, would not see as somebody is dealing with trauma. So where does your training? Because I know you also worked a lot with veterans and people like that who've had that style of trauma. How does your training, your background in trauma work, kind of complement the spiritual trauma work?
Well, part of my whole notion is I can't really define what's traumatic for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody wants to call it spiritual abuse, who am I to change their terminology? That's not fair. That's not right. If it's a trauma for them, and in our community we call it big T, little t, it's T. It is tea.
Still
Let's
a
just
day,
get real.
right? Right.
Let's just let it be what it is, and just really get in with them and say, listen, I can really understand how that could be a thing. I can relate. I can understand. There are people who have da 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 da. Just make sure that they're heard
Mm-hmm.
and felt and understood. That's just the only thing that is going to be the thing that obviously we need to make sure that we don't delegitimize what has happened because we may not understand. Abandonment issues are a thing. We deal with that in its own way. Sometimes there is the complicated grief that comes with that because the people are sometimes still alive.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that piece as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, in order to transform trauma, transform traumatic grief of a spiritual nature, do you find that you spend a lot of time um, just being, you talk about, having, being present and those kind of things, but just giving them a place to just talk rather than actually applying a lot of specific techniques?
If I apply specific techniques, part and parcel of how that spiritual/religious trauma happened was the application of techniques.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. 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 Exactly.
Yeah, and I don't want to do that. That would be re-traumatizing the client. Allow them to do what they do and
Mhm.
say, you know what, that was a really, really horrible experience, and I can honor that. And up underneath it all, if you were to design your own group of people that would share your values, which at the
Mhm.
end of the day, I tend to think that is my personal definition of spirituality, what would that look like? And what things would you want to possibly save from
Mhm.
your time in that community or those communities that wasn't entirely bad yet got bad?
Mhm.
So we tried to save those specific things that were useful for them so that they can still represent them in different ways.
So I think that's kind of similar to the what we mentioned earlier about balancing perceptions. So rather than saying nothing good came out of this,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very common thing for us all to do when we go through, initially,
Oh, heck
go at a
yeah.
bad time. Oh my God, nothing good came out of this
I was
20-year
ruined
marriage.
for
Yeah,
decades. Yeah, exactly.
and you're saying, okay, fair enough, but yet let's actually give a voice to the positive, if I can even use that term, positive.
I know it feels
Uh,
weird.
yeah, I don't, but it's a balance there.
Mm-hmm.
I like your comment about doing techniques to them because they may have had techniques done to them. How often do you find, and we're going down a little dark turn here, how often do you find that the predatory nature of some individuals tends to move them or they move themselves into positions of power within these communities?
Oh, charisma is a beautiful thing, isn't it, though?
It is. It is.
Yes, and that dark charisma is a real thing. And these sort of techniquey, whatever techniques they would want to use to be able to obtain that power for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And in this case, a dark reason being very manipulative, yet nothing that anybody could put a finger on, particularly to say that is manipulative right there.
Mhm.
So therefore, they're able to sneak around and slither around and just be really greasy in that way. I remember going to a service 4 years ago or so, I was like, all right, the only way that I can actually be have a state of equanimity is to actually go be in that community. I cannot be that person that says they are wrong. So I went in, and the second I went in there, the lights were sort of dimmed. It was sort of this purple,
Mm-hmm.
and it was this sort of interesting music that they were playing. And then, of course, we all start to sing, and they sing in this certain key at a
Mm-hmm.
certain rate and speed. And this, I stepped out of there. I was like, that was a trance.
Mm-hmm.
They just invoked trance, is what they did there. That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what they did.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some ways of doing religious services, uh, people don't know that, like certain, let's say, I'm in the South, so I've noticed some holiness preachers. It's how they've learned. So they don't even know that the way that they're talking with every exhale, and they're just saying it this way, and you keep talking like this over and over, and it just in time it gets them to a slightly altered state, and amazing things. As we know, with coming from an Erickson, Milton Erickson kind of inspired background, trance can do some pretty incredible things. You
That
know,
again.
I'm reminded of the Irish author Thomas Sheridan, who had said one time, if you want to succeed in religion, politics, or media, don't study political science, theology, or journalism. Study the psychopaths. Because what you do, the psychopathic mind, in many ways, they tend to rise in some aspects. I'm not saying everyone here, but rise in that because that's he's alluding to that charisma, and we like charisma. I like being around charismatic people. I mean,
Well, they're very bubbly, they're very interesting, they're very
right?
exciting, and they're very engaging until all of a sudden you realize, holy crap, I've been engaged. I
Yeah,
mean,
and, and, it,
what
and, it,
have I
and it
done?
happens like that. It can
Yeah.
happen like
I mean,
that.
the Kool-Aid's a real thing.
Yeah, it is. It
Yeah.
is.
Hmm.
So when somebody comes to you and says, "I'm devastated because I've lost my church family or whatever religious family," and it's having an impact on my real family. How do you navigate that with now we've got the system of the religion, the system of the family, and then the individual kind of, tied into all of that?
Particularly if their family is a part of that religion. That's a really
Right.
it's very common, oddly, sadly enough, as well. Again, trying to get back to, okay, so what was possibly, okay, so we already know this is going to be a hotbed of contention here. Um, we'll just say the client's name is John. We already know this is a hotbed of contention. We already know that she is this way, that way, and the other thing, and you've already come out and she hates it, and she's pretty sure you're going to hell, and your partner's going to hell, and everything is awful. And yet, isn't it interesting that she is still concerned about you?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she could really have washed her hands of you, as it is written, as you know, in blah, 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 blah. She has that right to do that. And isn't it interesting that she didn't do that? I wonder why she didn't totally do that.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to try to unearth in some way from their perspective, why did she not just wash her hands?
Mm-hmm.
And then how did she stay the course with me as her son and stay in the faith? How did she do? The woman is 82 years old. How does
Mm-hmm.
she do this?
Mm-hmm.
And getting behind, God, she does love me, maybe. I know that sounds so weird, but my goodness, she does love me. Well,
Mm-hmm.
isn't that interesting? So I wonder if you could communicate through that value that you both share, because it seems like you really love her too. And it's not necessarily that you have to hide that you're gay. That's just not the point. The point that you want to show is that you love your mom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm.
So utilizing the resource that's already there.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, I mean, if it's already there, I don't even have to build a new one. They already
Yeah.
have it and they own it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I have a friend who I've known for 20 years, but his uh, his spouse became very was from a religious family, but became very involved in this end of times kind of prophecy church. And as a result of that, and they have two children. She, as a result of that, with these two kids, she has wanted him to cut off all contact with everyone who's not tied to that, to
Mm.
protect the two children and to keep the family intact. So I haven't spoken to him in a very long time because he's just not
Well,
returning
he
the
can't.
call.
Yeah, he's kind of
Yeah.
prohibited from that.
So if somebody comes in with that kind of situation, since we have, and that's why I brought up the two children, if you're the husband or the wife and you're trying to, what's best for the kids, and they go, I'm going to sneak off and see Kathleen Shannon in Black Mountain because I got this issue. Their goal is, it sounds like, maybe to navigate where they are, maintaining where they are, at least to, let's say, the kids grow up, but also to hold on to their own, I hate to use this term, but their own sanity dealing with this kind of situation. And I'm not putting you on the spot to come up with a solution for that, but how working with someone like that, because that sounds, I've heard that in my own sessions where one partner becomes really involved in something of a spiritual or pseudo spiritual nature, and the other partner is dealing with not only feeling left out but maybe an aversion, and that causes issues in the relationship, let alone now we have a whole family that's kind of, to stay together is dependent on acquiescing to this, but then people get isolated in that.
Very easy, and that's part of even the homeschooling environment, and the whole, all of that is can be drawn into something like that. If the client were to come see me, the one thing that really stands out in this picture is this person's care and concern for his children and for his wife or her husband or whomever.
Mhm.
And the fact that he would want to protect his children in
Mhm.
terms of, listen, we have a solid family unit, and it's much better to be together than it is to just to be spread apart all over the place, because that's not safe.
Mhm.
And isn't it interesting that you value them that much? And I'm wondering if you were to communicate with her in being sort of the watchdog, as it were, that you would be the one to actually, you have to go in the community to make sure that they're safe, that you're the one to keep them safe by going into the community and making sure that they're going to be okay. So therefore it gives them assurance and credibility that they are protected from the outside world, because you are doing the role as the husband of being the protector of the family, to try to frame it in that way so that he could possibly translate that back to the family, saying, listen, it's important that we stay away, but somebody needs to keep watch.
Mhm. Mhm. There's those are situations that there's no easy answer.
There are none. That is, and that just came out of somewhere.
Mhm.
I don't even know if it's even a right answer. I just know that it
Yeah.
could be a possible answer, because
Mhm.
the thing that I'm seeing the most is that this person cares about their family and
Right.
they want to keep them protected. It would be nice if they could keep them protected from this, whatever this pseudo spiritual end of times prepper people that we need to do. And when one is in a cult, one will defend the cult tooth and nail, even more so when one is attacked for being in the cult.
Mhm. Mhm.
So if he were to go attack the person, say, how can you even possibly believe that? You're a complete idiot. If the person is slowly not believing, they're going to do CPR on their faith to try to bring it back, because now they have something to defend.
Mhm.
No one deliberately says, "Oh, I think it's Tuesday. I think I should go join a cult today." No, no, we don't do that. This is not how it's done. It's very subtle. It's over a period of time. You don't even realize it until you're in it. Being attacked will not set that person free, allowing that person to just ask questions.
Mhm.
Because usually in an environment like that, uh, the ability to ask questions is definitely squelched. We have the answers and we will feed you the answers, and these are the answers that you will give. This is the story, this is the narrative. When they're free to have a different narrative, they can choose all kinds of different things. In those environments like that, I don't tend to, I remember thinking along those lines that Legalism turns spirituality into a morality competition.
Okay, expand on that, please.
Legalism, are you doing the right things? Is there a nice little checklist? Yes, no, yes, no. Now, if it's for yourself, that's one thing to some degree. But when you decide you're going to use that as a measure as to whether
Mhm.
anybody else is going to be spiritual, of course, you wouldn't say legalistic because that's a bad word in the community. You don't want to be considered legalistic. That's no, we're not that. You start to use that as a report card, as it were. And even insofar as a real quote unquote report card, where you go report to the higher ups, hey, this person isn't doing their thing.
Mhm.
And then it ends up being this sort of, I'm better than you because I have more check marks showing that I'm doing the right thing. And
Mhm.
look at you, you're not nearly as spiritual because you don't have as many check marks.
Right. I
Yeah.
think Trungpa referred to that as spiritual materialism, and that we, our goal is to be more spiritual than the next person. I recycle more than you. Kind of okay.
You've been to Asheville too much.
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
And, um, but that involves our ego, our desire to to feel like we're worthwhile people. I heard someone say that when you create a morality to which no one can succeed in, you have a wonderful way to control anyone.
Oh, that is brilliant. I have not heard that. Who said that?
It'll come to me.
Okay.
To me.
I
Yeah.
could Google, but that
Yeah.
I don't know.
I should have just said I made it up, but
Well, I'm going to give you
that's
credit for it. How about
no.
that?
Please don't. But in a way, I think that's true because our being human is so fallible. And if we do certain things with some groups, like have a sexual thought, and then that's considered you're bad. And then the other thing, the old different group, well, if I get angry, well, that's bad, you're not spiritual. So our ability to be human, in which we encompass all of our uh, traits, all of our emotions. Now, when that is something that it's impossible not to be human, I'm always going to feel bad if I'm that guy or girl who's desperately wanting to measure up to something that is near impossible
Exactly.
to measure. So,
Yeah, it's not inspiring. If anything, it shoves negative behavior in a closet.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And trust me, it's still going on.
Oh yeah, but definitely. And that's you think with as intellectual as we have come in this whole species, we're at the height of in our history of technology, and things in many ways are more peaceful now, according to Steven Pinker's new book about there's less violence in the world overall. But yet we still, as a species, I think, tend to fall back, many of us, into this, I think, a desire for approval, a desire for community and connection, which our brains are a social organ, that it's real easy for those to play on that, either intentionally, as we were talking about, or maybe even unintentionally.
Yeah.
So the role of fear, I think, has
And
a lot to
shame.
do. Yeah.
Shame is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And shame, of course, having a root in fear. Oh, I'm not going to be part of the group. I'm going to be a lone wolf. I'm going to
Right.
die out on out in the land of Nod.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, that reminds me of my favorite philosopher, Groucho Marx, said that he would never belong to any club that would have someone like him as a member. And I think that one quote has probably helped in the back of my mind not to get as involved as I could have been in a lot of the group think. But at the same time, it is a natural desire for me to be included, a natural desire for you or anyone else who's watching this. We would like to be a part of something. And when we feel initially, I guess that, oh, we've come home,
Mm-hmm.
and we have that. And then things start to, I call it the dating period, the first 6 months of the relationship. Boy, she's really nice. He's really nice. I go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a temple. Everyone's really nice. This is really great. And then in time, we get attached to that. And, that dopamine's really cooking in our brain, and we get really attached to it. And then we're so afraid to lose that we start to lose parts of ourselves. How do you help people regain those parts of themselves?
Oh my goodness, that's a big one. I've been very, oof. Um, Losing oneself, capital S, self, in an ideology that may be tied up with a person or whatever, that it happens often. It happens often. Um, Also reinforced by the notion of people running around saying, well, if you're real, whatever the fill in the blank is, then you will do whatever, usually what they want you to do,
Right.
which is, I can't even know what to do with that. So the beautiful thing that I have discovered um, is Connie Ray Andreas's work and Tamara Andreas's work with core transformation, where they do parts work. And they don't label the parts as this is the bad part, this is the good part, this is the kind of part. The parts self-label.
Mm-hmm.
It's finding the positive intention of the positive intention. You know, I'm so, I need to belong. And when you belong, what happens? What do you want through belonging that's even deeper?
Mm-hmm.
And keep going down that whole beautiful chain to what the Andreas is referred to as core state,
Mm-hmm.
where it's just this beautiful, expansive, and many times I've done this work with trauma that the people don't have words.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I say, you know what? Sometimes putting words on something would limit just how beautiful it is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, yeah. And I said, tell you what, can you just kind of describe what you see? Because I think I see what you see. Nobody goes into trance alone in my office.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go with them. I want to see what they see and just be with them. That's how I operate. And so when I'm in that core state with them, it just heals themselves. They realize that's what they want and that's what they already have.
Right.
So therefore they don't have to lose these parts of themselves to ideologies, to people, to approaches. And it's not that they get to be an island. It's that they realize the purpose of that core state is to be that infinite pool of which everyone is a part.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been very, very blessed to be able to use that work in spiritual and religious trauma because it speaks to the people who come from that environment in a way that is very resonant to them because it has, and again, I don't even know how to define this word spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
It has a spiritual almost component to it that as they go through, and I just sit in there and I'm just like, wow. And they just look at me like, wow. And it's what we refer to in the South usually as the mountaintop experience type situation.
Right.
The whole Shekinah glory bit is quite lovely.
Mm-hmm.
And I just see them the next week, and they're like, I don't know what happened, but this isn't nearly as much of a problem as it has been. It's like, well, isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm. So my last question is if someone recognizes that they are experiencing spiritual trauma, what do you think the most important first step for them to take toward healing is?
Find a safe place. Find a very safe place that will listen to your questions and not answer them. Honest to goodness. Just say, that's a good question. I wonder what the answer is.
Mm-hmm.
Tell you what, go find out what the answer is and tell me what it is next time. And then
Mm-hmm.
come back. I said, that's interesting. Do you think that there might be some more answers too? There could be more. I mean, this may not be just it, you know. It may be something else. We don't know. Go find some more answers so that they get to realize that the questions are not the problem. The questions are what's going to heal them. And the fact that they can have more than one answer and it's okay
Mm-hmm.
is what's going to be helpful. A lot of people will all of a sudden they'll hear refrains of a hymn and then they just freeze up. They're like, oh, that is that. That's one of the things that they can definitely notice. A lot of times some people get a whiff of incense and like, oh, we're not doing this. Goodbye, thank you, and good night. Or some other something, sometimes a certain phraseology. Well, you've backslidden. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That if they're realizing that these little traits of the group are causing them pause,
Right.
they may just want to consider, wait a minute, is this okay? And
Mm-hmm.
then just find some place that's going to hear your questions without giving you answers.
Right.
Yeah.
probably good for any uh, body seeking their own answers, is to not to have them answered by definitely people like us, initially. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I was told in grad school, don't you bring up religion in the room. And
yeah,
I'm thinking, well, what if that what brought them there? I should do that, shouldn't I do
yeah,
that?
probably a
And
good
I
idea.
and they said no, and I was like, okay. Granted, this was 20 years ago, but
Yeah,
I don't know if it's changed since then. I hope it has.
I hope so too. Well,
Mhm.
Kathleen, this has been very enlightening, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. And I think you're doing some really good work out there, and hopefully we can see maybe more, I guess, attention on this specific kind of issue that people have. So thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leslie.
Mhm.